Hello, I'm Rosemary Hannah. Welcome to The Bahamas Then and Now, a series that deals with our heritage, history, arts, and culture, and those people who were involved and continue to be involved in guarding our heritage. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Today we have as our guest Kishan Munroe, artist, photographer, and Bahamian icon in fine arts. Welcome to the show, Kishan.
Thank you, Rosie.
Kishan, tell us a little bit about yourself and your genesis as an artist and photographer and how early that manifested itself in you.
Well, I'm a Bahamian. I was born in 1980 right here in New Providence. I grew up on East Street South. Grew up in a very creative household. You know, my mother was always doing something, my sister, my father was always doing something, not just in visual arts, but it sort of encapsulated everything. Music, literature, the visual arts, you know, performance. And so I guess you could say I grew up in a well-rounded household when it came to the arts. And my family members, distant and very close, were all involved in the arts. So I guess it came as second nature.
That's wonderful. Know? So where did you go to school?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I went to a lot of schools, and that is part of what shaped me to be the artist that I am right now. I remember when I was young, living in New Providence again, I started off Ridgeland Primary. At one point I was in St. Anne's, you know, and then I moved to Freeport when I was 7, and I went to St. Vincent de Paul. And I stayed there until high school, and I went to Catholic High. Then we moved back to Nassau, and I went to Jordan Prince William, and then I finished up at St. John's.
So when you decided that you wanted to become a professional artist, were there any negative vibes that you got from anyone? Did anyone say, well, why would you want to do that? How can you make a living at that? That sort of thing?
Yeah, it was a very strange time for me, you know, just getting ready to graduate from high school. Like I said, I was involved in a lot. I was involved in sports, in music, and of course I focused on my education. You know, I was into the books. I wanted to be an architect because for me that was sort of like the middle ground between fine art and just using your brain to do what people expect for you to do, you know. So it's in between like a doctor and a musician for a lot of people. And so I just didn't know what to do, you know, because there weren't many persons out there who would have been able to advise me as to which road to take. Because what I wanted to do was something a little bit different. I wasn't really sure. So there were some people who told me, you know, well, you shouldn't take that road because you won't really have stability. You know, how are you going to eat? Where are you going to find the money to go to school? Which school are you going to go to? You know, you ain't rich. And so focus on a good government job, you know, get that stability, you know, stay home, grow some roots. And so you have both ends of the balance. And it was just really sitting down and figuring out where my passion really lied. And I decided I wanted to go to art school after speaking with some of my mentors, you know, at the time, who knew about my journey, knew my history, and knew about my passion personally. So I decided to go to Savannah College of Art and Design, and I declared a major in painting. Then I got scared, and I declared a double major in painting and visual effects, which is like explosions, computer-generated effects.
So that was really very enlightening for you, wasn't it?
The experience at college? Yes, extremely enlightening, because it is an international college for the arts, and so you have people from all over the world. You know, all of these different cultures is like a melting pot. In the small town, which just happens to be one of the first slave ports in America.
Is that so?
Yeah, yeah, Savannah, Georgia. And so it was this weird mixture of culture, but then again, you got to see the gentrification of the Savannahans, the black Savannahans, you know, due to the school growing.
Excellent.
And so all of these things were unfolding right before my very eyes. And coming from the Bahamas, you know, our history, our deep history, that we don't really pay attention to.
That's right.
You know, and here I am again in a very historic town, you know, and you get to see more of it. You know, you get to see the sculptures. You get to go into some of the museums. They really appreciated it a little bit more. You know, they have squares. Even the graveyard is like a big history lesson.
Yes.
And so that was one of the differences that I saw, that their culture of architecture. People go there just to study architecture. You know, so that in itself is a culture.
Quite an education. You know, I think many people do not realize that art really tells the history of a country.
Exactly.
Speak to that a little bit.
Well, as I traveled, as a tourist, is what you are when you travel. You get off at certain locations and, yeah, you want to see a park, you want to see the flora and the fauna of that specific place. But what you really want to do is tap into the soul of that place. You know, you want to see where it came from. You want to know the unique history. And so as a tourist, you would go to these places, you want to see the sculptures, you want to see Pompeii, you want to go to the house where this happened. You want to go to this museum dedicated to persons who lost their lives for whatever reason. You want to know about the revolutions, the civil wars. You know, you just don't want to see a pretty square or fountain that has no significance to you as a person ignorant of the significance of these places. And so I think it is very important that as people of these lands to inform those who are from foreign places as to what it is, you know, what it could be, where did we come from, what was this land.
That's why it's so important for us to be doing this program and other things like it, to encourage people to be more concerned about our indigenous culture and to share it with others. Now, in your during your work with your magnificent work that you did at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, you did a lot of traveling. Can you tell us a little bit about your travel and research?
Well, I graduated from college with my double majors in 2005. And a part of my thesis was really discovering myself. You know, it was on the duality of life and death. And so I really started this introspective study. And I started studying my family members. So what I did was I asked them to send me passport-sized photos, and what I did was I blew them up larger than life. And that was during the time when the war in Iraq was still fresh in the air. And so you had all of this talk about profiling, about what you could see if you really look into the lines and all of these different subtle characteristics of the face. And so I decided, let me try this for myself. What could I find out about myself as an individual? What do I have in common with my family members? What does the characteristics of their faces tell me about their history that I didn't know before? And I learned so much from that, that I decided that I want to really study people more, because there's always so much more you can learn. And that really got me thinking about history. And like I said, watching CNN, Fox, all the different media groups, and everybody had a different perspective. And, you know, just coming out of my thesis, you are like on this cognitive steroid. You know, you're thinking about everything and you're thinking about it at 100 miles an hour. And so you want to learn more. And I think it was at that point in my life where you just want to flourish, you know, intellectually. You want to put all of these faculties, all of the resources that you spent so much time gathering, you want to put it to use, you know, because you feel the power of it. You see what you could do with it if you just shape it and mold it in the right way. It only takes some time and a little bit of thinking, you know.
So which countries did you visit?
Well, I started off in South America and Guyana. The reason I started there was because that is when they had Cara Festa. And so it gave me an opportunity to see a lot of the countries in one place, because I wouldn't be able to hit all of the countries at one time. So it gave me an opportunity to see what they held there to their culture, what they felt was indicative of where they came from. And literally on the stage, I began to see the universality of our cultures. So I traveled from Guyana into Suriname. From Suriname, I think I traveled to Haiti or Trinidad, and then I worked my way up into America because that's when they had the presidential elections for Obama. You know.
Were you in Washington then?
Yeah, I went to Washington. I went to New York as well, and I was in between. And then I made my way up the East Coast, up into Canada. Spent a little while in Canada, and every place that I went to, I started uncovering stories. You know, asking people on the ground, the natives, okay, tell me the stories of this place.
Yes.
You know, what stories are there that you have that people don't know about that you feel is significant? And so everywhere that I went, I started taking notes. I started interviewing people, taking pictures, because you never know what you have.
That's
you know?
right.
And so I spent a little while in Canada, like I said, doing the same thing. And then I made a trip cross country into Seattle by train. Went up into Alaska, spent a little while in Alaska, then started making my way back down the West Coast. Made my way down the West Coast, spent a little while in Los Angeles. California, basically.
Is all of this travel what motivated you to do your exhibition or to do your paintings for the Swan Song of the Flamingo?
Partially because everywhere that I went, I met people, interesting people, and people I can now put in different categories, even though they came from different cultures. And one thing I would always do is seek inspiration, enlightenment. Tell me about your religion. Tell me about your history. What words of advice do you have for me as a young man, as a young black man?
As a relatively young man,
exactly.
Yes.
And so I learned so much because it became another university.
Kishan, this has been a very intriguing conversation so far. And when we come back, we'll talk more about your exhibition, The Swan Song of the Flamingo, at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. We'll be right back.
You're watching The Bahamas Then and Now. This episode is brought to you by the Private Trust Corporation Limited, Dungalik Studios, and Easy Light Native Charcoal.
This is the Bahamas. 700 islands, reefs, and keys, sporting a distinct history and heritage all its own. This is New Providence, most populated, industrialized island at the center of the archipelago. Home of Nassau, the capital city, seat of Parliament, location of political and social revolution, site from which our nation declared its independence. And this is Over the Hill, a community, a series of neighborhoods in what was then considered Southwest New Providence. Settled by slaves, having served as the midwife of national deliverance. Over the Hill, a breeding ground of nation builders, constructing trait by trait, precept upon precept, character-toting, culture-shaping leaders. Over the Hill, where independence was born, where the naval string of Bahamianization is buried, where Junkanoo got polished. Over the Hill, where sense and sensitivity were kneaded into the dough of children's souls, where people reverently genuflected to the image of God in every man. Over the Hill. East Street, Market Street, Blue Hill Road, Baintown, Grantstown, Anderson Street, Augusta Street, DeFort Hill, McPherson Street, Over the Hill, McCullough Corner, Hay Street, Glinton Square, where? Mason's Addition, Jail Alley, Lewis Street, Over the Hill. The Coakleys, the Smiths, the Johnsons, the Blydens, the DeStoops, the Grants, and the Coopers, the McPhersons and the Pindlings, the Allens and the Winders, over the hill, the Hannahs, the Bostricks, the Burnsides, the Bethels, the Walkers, the Enuses and the Thompsons, the McCartneys and the Gibsons, over the hill. What if we went back and dug into the soil of our glorious past? And what if we studied the roots and found the patterns of Bahamian unity and success and progress, and superimposed those on the social ills of Lil Nassau, the social ills of the Bahamas in general? What would happen? What would happen if we really understood where we came from? Our heritage is not ghetto. Our language is not profanity. Our resolution is not violence. We are Bahamians, kings and queens, gentlemen and ladies, athletes and warriors in every sphere, geniuses and priests, artists and leaders, and much of it started over the hill.
You're watching the Bahamas Then and Now.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Kishan Munroe. And before the break, we were talking about your travels. Tell us more about that and your exhibition at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas.
Well, like I was telling you before we went to the break, I was in California for a while, and then I bought a vehicle. And my intention was to travel to Argentina, to drive to Argentina. Mm-hmm. That didn't turn out the way I expected it to. I had an accident traveling through the mountains of Mexico, and near-death experience.
Wow.
And so I was out of commission. So I had to take the bus to the rest of the way, which was a good experience in itself because it gave me a new appreciation for life and a new appreciation for the reality of death, which sort of keeps you on your toes, you know, and it gave me a different outlook on life and my art. And so I traveled through Central America, went down into South America, and I left out of Colombia, and then I came back home. I spent a couple months back here in New Providence, even though I was still traveling to different places. I would watch the news, I'd watch CNN, and I'd say, okay, where's the conflict? I'd find the biggest conflict, like Occupy Wall Street, and I would just book a ticket and fly there, and just jump in the crowd, because I still had it in my blood, you know, that sense of adventure, because you pick up so many tactics, you know, along the way. You become like almost a detective, you know.
Interesting.
And so, like I said, it's still in my blood, and so I was traveling in between, came back home, and I decided I want to show not only Bahamians, I want to show the world what it is that I have amassed, you know, all of this experience, all of this footage, all of the lessons that I've learned. How do I put it together? And it's not necessarily what I had, is the connections that I know I would have been able to make. And so I wanted to make a connection between the Bahamas and a country in the Caribbean, really speaking about conflict and resolution, because that is what my traveling project, I guess you could call it a traveling project, which is entitled The Universal Human Experience. That is what it is all about, showing the universality of humankind, showing that even though we might have triumphs and pitfalls, we still have things that are very, very common. And so doing my research, of course, the first thing I did was Google Bahamas, Caribbean conflict, and I came upon the Flamingo incident. There's very little online documenting what happened. And so it really piqued my interest, because it was a conflict between the Bahamas and Cuba, of course, and Ragged Island was smack dab in the middle of it. The Defense Force was in the middle of it. The Bahamas was a newly independent country. And so it was so significant that I couldn't understand why, up until that point, we didn't place more emphasis on it, even though yearly they commemorated it, the Defense Force, May 10th, 1980. But as a country, as a nation, we still weren't learning about it.
Yes, we were not teaching our history, really.
Exactly.
So when you decided to go into this venture, what were the obstacles that you met? I know you traveled to Cuba and other places, and you really did a lot of in-depth research. What sort of problems did you encounter?
The first problem that I encountered was the lack of information, of good information, because the first thing that I did was I went to the archives. I hired a researcher as well to help me sift through all of this information. And when something first happens, nobody really knows what happened, how it happened, when it happened, who did what. And so you had all these different accounts from different perspectives, and the numbers weren't always adding up. The names started changing until you get like a couple of weeks into it and you start really fleshing out what's the official story. And because it was a military situation, you can't really rely on the official story, because the official story is just what they probably want you to know. And so what I did after I obtained all of the information from the archives and other places, I started highlighting the names, the places of interest, and really started calling them up on the phone, those who were still alive at the time, and really delving into it, probing what happened, when did it happen, would you be able to speak to me? Would you feel comfortable speaking with me? Because at that point I was still Kishan Munroe, unknown, to those outside of the art community. For people to take me seriously enough, you had to know what you were speaking about to a certain extent. And so that was one obstacle that I had. And then I started traveling to Cuba, and I informed the Cuban government what I wanted to do, because I didn't want this project to be seen as propagandistic. Because it would have created more problems than formed solutions. And so I informed them, look, I want to really analyze, I want to investigate what happened in 1980, because in my mind 1980 was a long time ago. I don't think they see it the same way. And Cuba is still very highly classified. And so they didn't release any information other than the information, I think it was 3 responses that they published in their periodical Grandma in Cuba, as well as here in the Bahamas. And so I would say for years I was working on this project for about 2.5, 3 years before I started getting anywhere. So I was in between here in Cuba trying to get people to help me get information from the right sources, and Cuban culture and time is a little different. It's a little slower than Bahamian culture and Bahamian time.
So how did you go about gaining the rapport with the survivors and members of the families of those men who died? Was that difficult?
Persistence. I mean, once you show people that you're really serious and you have taken the time to not only learn about it, but you take the extra step. You actually started traveling to these places. You met with the other persons who were involved, and once you gain their confidence, then they would recommend that you speak to somebody else. And so it was just natural with relationships. You have to build trust. Nobody is just going to come up and give you their trust, give you their number, come into my house. They want to know who you are, who is your family, what do you know, ask. Why are you asking these questions? You weren't even born yet,
Having seen the exhibition, your works are really larger than life and very, very realistic. And you also use some symbolism in the art. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that my work is larger than life, because that is part of what propels me. I always leave probably just a little bit of blood on the canvas, literally, just from struggling with them physically, even if it's just scratching the canvas. A lot of people don't realize artists, I build my canvases from the frame up. I chop the wood, I stretch the canvas, I prime the canvas, and then I put my thoughts on it. And then I have to feel my way, work my way through them, And so the symbology is part of it, but everything about it, is careful attention. How thick is the frame? How big do I want it so people really feel it. So when I get into the symbolism, I use an underpainting of this rosy pink, you know, this quinacridone red tint. And it really is symbolic of, first of all, the flamingo, which is our national bird. The flamingo was one of the first ships for the Royal Bahamas Defense Force at that time. And it also symbolizes sweetness, you know, because from the persons I interviewed, the Marines who were on board, they keep describing it as very calm, you know, very peaceful, very beautiful. And so I picked up on a color that I think was indicative of that. When you see pink, you think about little girls, you think about strawberries, you think about soft things. But then again, if you see pink water or reddish water, it's alarming because water isn't supposed to be pink, isn't supposed to be reddish. And so it's alarming, but at the same time, it's sort of comforting. And so I really wanted to play with the pink of the flamingo, which is very unique, as well as the alarming nature of it, you know, when you focus on a calm day, but all of this drama, all of this tragedy, all of this death, unknowingness, the fog of war, so to speak.
What was the reaction of the survivors when they actually saw the paintings and the people from Ragged Island who came for the exhibition? What sort of reaction did you get from them?
It was very
moving.
Very interesting. For me, I felt as though I had taken a step up on the ladder of being a social artist, a social realist, is what I would consider myself. Because I would always go and interview them, I would speak to them. Okay, what position was the boat in? You know, what did it smell like? What did the diesel taste like? Who was where, when, how? And I kept asking them these things over and over again because you're speaking to so many different people. Not all of these persons were in the same position at the same time, you know, and so I had to, like a forensic scientist, I guess you would say, dissect the situation based on their accounts and put it back together artistically. And so they never saw what I was working on.
Until the end.
Until the end, until the actual show. Because I didn't want it to taint my perspective, because what I also had them do was draw out the logistics of what happened. And so I know the positioning and everything. I know what the flamingo looked like. What I didn't know, I could probably make up. You know, of course, the 4 Marines who died, there weren't many photos of them, and so I had to use, you know, my talents and really sort of superimpose their faces and put them on different bodies and put them in motion to bring them to life, you know, so to speak, and really get people to feel their struggle, put them on a human level, you know, put them in the water with them. So you begin to smell the smoke, you begin to hear the scream, ow, ow, which is what some of them said that they heard some of the Marines screaming.
Kishan, can you tell us very briefly what happened on that day in 1980?
Basically, Flamingo sank. 4 men were missing when a count was taken, and the crew of Flamingo had to move on. So they took the 8 Cuban fishermen with the rest of the crew from Flamingo, and they made their way toward Ragged Island.
Kishan, this has been very, very educational. And I think it's very important for us and all of us to know this history. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.